Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I've positioned a few things out here on my bench to serve as hints as to what's going on today. And another hint is going to be those two tubs resting over on top of the Vermibag Mini. So many of you probably already know what's in store for today's video, and it's a harvesting of the castings in which I've got some worms living. Those are the worms that I've been referring to for some time now as our odd couple bins. And those bins, the reason they're called odd couple bins is because of the 60 days difference in their ages. One of them is currently my oldest system over there, and the other one that it was teamed up with to be its couple, its odd couple, is over here. And those are the bins that we're going to be trying to get the worms out of, separate the worms from their castings using my screen that you saw up on the bench earlier. The year that we're in right now, when this video is filmed, is 2024, which is a leap year, and it's for that reason 366 days, which is the age of the older bin, counts as a full year. So the older bin is a year old now, and the younger bin is 60 days less than that. Other stats about how many times these bins have been fed and so on can be seen here, as well as the information about how long ago these new bins that they're going to be moved into, how old they are. They're 8 days of age at this point. Built 8 days ago in preparation for today. So I'm going to put a glove on. We're going to start with the younger system, and what I'll do is I'll just get them out here on the bench. We'll start screening. So let's get to work. Now, my reason for beginning with the younger of the two bins is not arbitrary. It's because the bin is a little bit bigger than the other one. I've got a few of these slightly larger sized tubs, and that's the reason I thought we would start with this one today, because into this one we're going to end up putting all the nice finished castings that end up passing through the screen down into the red bucket, and then it'll be here in this larger bin where we're going to set up this so-called bait box that I like to do sometimes. I did this less than 2 weeks ago. I think it was 11 days ago that we did this with another set of worms where we harvested the castings out of two systems and relocated the worms into new homes, and then we went ahead and combined all those sifted castings into a single container where we positioned one of those little bait boxes, really just a tray with a bunch of holes in it, full of nice fresh bedding, into which the worms can climb to go after not only the nice fresh bedding, but also the food that was placed in there for them. So I think we're going to be catching a lot of leftover bits and pieces of stuff like what you see here, leftover bits of corn cob. A lot of it is right out here on the surface, which is going to end up just getting caught in the screen and going with the worms. And we will also catch a great deal of worms with which to launch our new systems today. But a lot of the worms are going to end up, falling through the screen down into the batch of finished castings. And that's the reason I'll typically set up a bait box. Look at all that. This actually makes me worry a little bit. While it's just, it's fun to see a large number of worms congregating together in this way. Usually that's a behavior that's caused by the worms being to a certain degree in distress, and that might be because the material that they're occupying has been allowed to get pretty darn dry. And the reason I wanted to let it get fairly dry was because of what we're doing right now, to make the screening process easier, allow more of the material to be fairly granular and capable of passing through the screen. But at this point I am glad that we're following through with this final stage of these two bins' life cycles, because the worms are probably ready for a nice moist environment into which they could be relocated, because worms don't do well, when there's an absence of moisture, and there's not really a true absence of moisture. I mean, the material that they're occupying does have a certain amount of moisture content, but perhaps not quite as much as the worms would like. And that might be part of the reason the worms look a little bit small, perhaps slightly dehydrated compared to how they could be if there was more moisture available to them. So I am glad that we're finally getting around to getting these little guys out of their current home and into their new home. Their new home is a little different from what I did when I launched off new bins last time 11 days ago. Last time 11 days ago there was really just bedding set up for them, nice damp bedding into which they could be positioned. And then I came back later, I think it was only a day or two later, perhaps even the next day, I don't recall exactly, to come back and give them their first feeding. But here I figured I would pre-build these bins with food, and it was a really large chunk of pumpkin that I threw in there for them. And not only that, but I took the seeds that came out of that pumpkin and I blended it up and I made like a pumpkin seed smoothie for them, which I drizzled across the top surface. None of that will be visible when I bring those bins out to release these worms into their new home, because I've gone ahead and put some leafy matter out across the top surface as sort of a welcoming environment for them to be dropped into once we get to relocating them over into the new home. And you know, there is quite a bit of stuff getting caught here in these screens here. A lot of stuff besides leftover food items, also just some material that seems to have just clumped together, perhaps because it was a little bit too moist at one point, but the process of allowing this stuff to dry out just didn't result in loose, crumbly material, unfortunately. So I am starting to question whether or not I'm going to have enough space in this container here to hold all the material that gets caught in the screen. I might actually need to remove some of it, place it into something else, or possibly just go grab some other container into which we can position the screen material. So I think I'm going to go ahead and pick up the pace here for you guys. I'm going to cease my narration and increase the speed of the playback so that you can see the rest of this in sort of fast motion and get us to the end of this screening process. And I'm just wondering if I'll need to interrupt that along the way to get them a different container for their large amount of screened material that's coming along for the ride with them. And yep, I think that's exactly where we're at already. So I think I'll take a quick break, transfer this material, and then play the rest back for you in fast motion. Alrighty then, so I think that's that as far as screening the younger of the two bins, and we really ended up with a whole lot more material than I expected. I didn't think we'd have enough to fill up that little trash pail, but we certainly do. And it's fair to assume that we're going to have a similar story over in the older system. That is, unless of course we've got more granular flaky stuff that ends up more down in the red bucket rather than in the screen and getting transferred with the worms over into the new bins. But at this point, you know, I think it's all good either way, whether the worms make it into the new home now or whether it happens later after we've baited the castings and rounded them up out of their finished castings. Doesn't matter so much. This seems a little bit unfortunate too. I think what we're catching here on the screen at this point is just some dead worm carcasses. I really don't see any other squirmy remaining living worms in the screen. So why don't I take a quick pause at this point, tidy things up, consolidate what we've managed to capture in the screen over here, and get reset to take care of doing the same thing over in the younger bin. So just want to make sure I don't leave any little guys behind. So let's, okay, do I have them all? I believe I do. Oh, one more. Okay, wow, that's a lot of stuff. So let's get on to doing the younger of the two bins. All right, so now we're here in the older bin, the 1-year-old, 366-day-old bin. And now that I've seen how much space the sifted finished castings took up in the big container, it now, you know, seems clear to me that they would have been just fine here in the smaller bin. Because what fell through the screen was really limited. Most of the stuff actually ended up getting caught in the screen, or, well, I can't say for sure most of it, but I would say probably half, which is much, much more than I really expected. But I did know from the get-go that this bin's material was rather clumpy for whatever reason. I don't know if at some point, somewhere along the line, perhaps I allowed things to get too moist and clumpy. Maybe I didn't use enough bedding, or whatever the case may be. Somehow a lot of this material really ended up turning into little compost balls. And I think once we get everything situated in their new home, along with the worms, this stuff will have a chance to sort of break apart and get blended in. And hopefully we won't have any other, let's say we won't have many other outcomes like this, where we end up having more clumps of material than we have nice, fine, smooth castings that are able to easily get sifted. And I really wouldn't be able to tell you for sure what led to this, you know. I mean, sometimes I hypothesize that perhaps I did run the systems with perhaps not enough bedding, but I really couldn't tell you for sure what causes that clumpiness. So I think here too, what we're going to do is just increase the speed of the playback of the video for your sake, so you can get to the finish line a little bit more quickly, and I guess it'll just save me the trouble of needing to fill the space with idle chatter, which probably just causes most people to doze off and fall asleep anyway. So let's fast forward. Alrighty, well, that's that. We've just finished the screening of the material that was in the younger of the two bins. It's a little bit of a, you know, messy process. Stuff flies around a little bit. You got to keep your eye around, you know, got to keep your eyes peeled, because I guess if some castings go flying around, it's no big deal. But if you strand little wormies on the dry table, that's definitely not a very good thing for them. So you want to try to gather up any worms that sort of get thrown to the side as a result of this process. But what we're left with now is these two containers, and that's where technically the worms are, And this is technically where the castings are, but all you got to do is look at the material that's classified as the harvested castings, and you can see there's lots and lots of worms remaining in this stuff, hence the baiting process. So what we're going to be doing is transferring this material into that container where I already positioned the screened material from the younger bin, and that stuff's going to get set up with a bait station. And at some point later in the game, we're going to try to round up those straggler worms from this material here. But I think this is the last we're going to see of this. The next step is to get the newly built bins out here. And here's the stuff that we got out of the younger bin. So I guess technically I usually keep older stuff on this side, younger stuff on this side. Alright, that's just me being a little bit OCD. I think the next step is to get the new systems out here on the bench and introduce these little guys to their new home. So now while these two new bins are chock full of fresh bedding and food, the one thing I did not include was any grit, so we're going to grab some of my pulverized eggshell here and drop it in so that the worms have a nice little dose of grit should they need any or want any. And I would imagine that the large chunk materials that got caught in the screen that's going along with the worms might already have some grit in it. And grit's good, but it's probably not crucial or absolutely critical. I'm sure the worms would get by without it. But as long as I've got that much of it here, I figured why not just give it to them. So this is the time to not really spend a whole lot of time talking. I think it's really just time to release the worms into their new home. And it's this part that makes me a little nervous. It's the inversion of the containers that I'm transporting them in over into their new home. And then over here we've got two to do the same thing with. So let's see how gracefully or not I can pull this off. Alright, and as always, I'm always really looking to you guys as the viewers to take a good look at what we're doing here in terms of worms being released and providing me with your estimates, because in most cases the worm bin population estimates that I share with you guys is not a number that I come up with alone. It's always, or at least almost always, kind of a joint effort where everyone kicks in their thoughts on how many worms were placed into a system, and it is a little bit tricky to see with all the surrounding material that the worms are being introduced into here with. And I sure hope that the material that got caught in the screen versus the material that was dry enough and flaky enough to fall through the screen has still got a good moisture content so that the worms can still be comfortable in this stuff if they decide to remain in the familiar material that they're occupying right now. But I also equally hope that the nice fresh bins that I prepared for them are also equally inviting. So let's give these little guys a chance to get settled into their new home, and then we'll be, for the most part, finished. I think these little guys have been through enough, so I think the time has come to cover them up and give them some peace and some darkness. So I've got these top coverings that were just sitting in these new bins awaiting new worms to come in. Well, not really. Actually, these pieces of paper were resting. Where were they? No, they were what was covering the worm bins that the worms had been occupying. But now they're coming over with the worms to be the paper top coverings in their new home. And now we're going to be bringing in plastic coverings to help the systems hang on to their moisture content. And I do feel for these little wormies because they've been in somewhat dry material for quite a while, and I think that might have resulted in them being a little bit lethargic, a little bit dehydrated. So these new bins have been equipped with a good bit of moisture, a fair bit of food, and hopefully we didn't end up with too many casualties. So there's only one last little matter of business. Many of you probably know what that is. So without any further ado, let's get on to that next. Yep, those of you who guessed that christening of the bins is the final order of business that we still need to take care of, you're 100% correct. So please join me in welcoming the two newest systems in my wormery. Red Wiggler worm bin number 1, Red Wiggler worm bin number 2. And as always, I'm always looking forward to hearing what everyone thinks in terms of how many worms were released into these systems. So please, don't forget to leave me a quick comment. Let me know what your estimate is on what the worm count is in these two systems. If it's the same, then be sure to let me know that it's a one number that applies to both. If you think one had more than the other, then please be specific in terms of how many worms were in each. And as always, I'll average those guesstimates for each system. And in the near future, I'll share what those calculated worm bin population estimates are with everyone. So that's it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.